what we often find in medicine is that if you go and see a rheumatologist, or you go and see an orthopedic surgeon, or you go and see a pain management doctor, or you go and see a chiropractor, or an osteopath, or a physio, or a massage therapist, or acupuncturist, you can go right down the whole spectrum. Often you're dealing with the same cases, the same symptoms, and there's a lot of gray there in reality. And so this is where I stepped in, and I started to see this big milieu of professionals trying to address similar conditions in many different ways. And if one didn't work, they would jump into another, and if another one didn't, they would jump to a third. And so patients would just rotate between all of them. And to this day, the world over, you'll see patients and you go through their histories, and it almost feels like they were playing musical chairs. They would just jump from one chair to another, and eventually, when nothing else can be done, a good orthopedic surgeon would say, well, listen, it's time, we need to cut you up and deal with something that's totally gone wrong here. So that's where I sort of stepped in, and I started looking into this very, very confusing array of conditions that were being dealt with in even more confusing manner. And so it was at that point in time that I said, and I know exactly what we can do by the application that we then came to be known as KKT. With the coming of KKT, one of the key things I wanted to establish was a very, very strong evidence-based protocol where all these physicians and surgeons were respected for what they did, but at the same time, it gave them a very clear direction, a mandate in how to treat the most important person here, the patient. So that when a patient walked in, we could assess them in a very reasonable way and know exactly what had gone wrong and how this could be corrected in the most scientific and the most effective way possible, and then at the same time take that patient and then, where necessary, have them benefit from all the other specialists and therapists. The simple cases that one sees generally in medicine is where somebody comes in on a wheelchair, and it doesn't take long before you see them walking out. That, of course, is very exciting. In our case, when we're talking about patients who are deteriorating and degenerating, there's no hope of ever getting them out of a wheelchair. It's not like an acute injury or somebody having a heart attack where they're going to recover and they'll come out of it. In this case, it's a one-way street, and you're all of a sudden able to reverse that. So that becomes very exciting. And the other part about this is where that even if the patient doesn't come in on a wheelchair, if the patient walks in, an athlete walks in, and you give them a treatment, you can see physically in front of you, within a few seconds, their whole body transform. And so you're watching this, and the patient, all they're concerned about, of course, is their aches and pains and maybe a dizziness or a headache or a migraine or some numbness or tingling or whatever they have for at that moment in their life. But you're seeing this patient walk away, and you very well know that 8 or 10 years down the road, this patient likely would not have been able to walk down a few kilometers, or they would not have been able to work on their computer, or they would not have been able to play with their children. And these were realities of life that were considered to be normal. And this was considered to be, in fact, the aging process, and an accepted view by most physicians and surgeons. The joy of walking in and seeing patients benefiting, and when I walk in and they don't know who I am, there's a special joy that goes into that is unmistakable, where you feel you've given something back to the world. It took me from 1995 to the year 2000 before I had built the first prototype, the first KKT prototype. And I had, by that time, spent every single one of my life savings. And by that time, I had lost 50% of my gray matter. And I had developed an anger management issue simply because it took so much out of me to being able to grab somebody and make them understand that this is what I wanted to do to the patient. And but it was an exciting time, and I still look back very, very fondly to those days.